A lone gray wolf emerged from the distant tree line and cautiously approached Albert, who sat in his usual spot by the waterfront. Rather than instilling fear, the wolf seemed drawn to the old man, its movements tentative yet purposeful. Albert, intrigued by the creature's calm demeanor, extended his hand in a silent gesture of welcome. From that moment, an unspoken understanding began to blossom between them. Albert was not unfamiliar with wildlife, having spent decades living near the edge of the forest. Yet, the wolf's behavior was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Day after day, the animal returned to the same spot, as if seeking Albert's company. This routine became so regular that whispers about the peculiar duo began circulating among the townsfolk. People speculated about what drew the wolf to Albert and why the old man appeared unafraid. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. The first time Albert saw the wolf, it had been a far different experience. He was alone, and the sight of the large predator approaching had sent a chill down his spine. Fearful but determined, Albert used what he'd learned from his younger years. He stood up slowly, opened his coat to make himself appear larger, and began making loud noises to scare the wolf away. Yet, to his surprise, the wolf did not retreat. Instead, it sat down a short distance away and stared at him, its golden eyes calm and unwavering. Albert's heart raced as he tried to assess the situation. The wolf's behavior was neither aggressive nor typical for a wild animal. Slowly, he lowered his arms and sat back on the bench. The wolf remained, its gaze fixed on him. The encounter ended without incident, but it left Albert deeply puzzled. In the days that followed, the wolf continued to visit, always maintaining a respectful distance but never failing to appear whenever Albert arrived at the waterfront. One crisp morning, Albert noticed something different about the wolf. When he approached the bench, the animal was already there, waiting for him. Its usual calm expression had been replaced by one of unease. The wolf's body quivered slightly and its ears twitched at every sound. Albert's concern grew as he sat down and observed the creature more closely. For the first time, he extended his hand toward the wolf, hoping to reassure it. The wolf hesitated but then leaned forward, sniffing Albert's outstretched fingers. Its warm breath brushed against his skin, and Albert felt an unexpected sense of connection. The wolf opened its mouth and gently placed its jaws around Albert's hand. Gasps erupted from a few passers-by who had stopped to watch, but Albert's calm demeanor quickly reassured them. The wolf's grip was soft, almost symbolic, as if trying to communicate something. Albert stood, gripping his cane, and began trailing after the wolf. The animal moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to ensure the old man was keeping up. The sight of Albert following the wolf through the park drew curious stares from onlookers. Some joked about his new pet while others expressed concern for his safety. Albert paid them no mind, his focus entirely on the strange journey unfolding before him. As they reached the edge of town, the wolf quickened its pace, leading Albert toward the forested cliffs that bordered the water. The path grew more challenging and Albert's breathing became labored. Still, he pressed on, driven by curiosity and an inexplicable trust in the animal. The forest, familiar yet filled with hidden mysteries, surrounded them as they ventured deeper. The air grew cooler, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocky cliffs grew louder. Suddenly, the wolf broke into a run, disappearing from Albert's view. He paused to catch his breath, worry creeping in as he scanned the dense trees for any sign of the creature. Moments later, a gunshot rang out, shattering the stillness. Albert's heart leapt as he instinctively ducked behind a tree. Peering cautiously around the trunk, he spotted a man dressed in camouflage holding a freshly killed bird. The hunter's presence so close to the cliffs puzzled Albert. Larger game typically stayed deeper in the forest. As the hunter walked away, Albert's eyes caught a glimpse of something behind a nearby tree, the tip of the wolf's tail. Albert hurried toward the hiding animal, his movements careful and deliberate. The wolf was visibly shaken, its body tense and eyes wide. When it saw Albert, its expression softened and it stepped out from its hiding spot. Their reunion was brief, as the wolf immediately resumed its journey, urging Albert to follow. The path grew steeper as they neared the cliffs. Albert struggled to keep up, his aging body protesting with every step. When they reached the cliff's edge, the wolf leapt onto a lower rock outcropping, disappearing from view. Albert hesitated, peering over the edge. His pulse quickened at the sight of the sheer drop, but he noticed the wolf below, looking up at him expectantly. Taking a deep breath, Albert made his decision. He tossed his cane down first, then carefully lowered himself onto the rock. The descent was anything but graceful. His landing was rough, and he stumbled onto his backside. Despite the discomfort, he couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The pair navigated a narrow, rocky path that wound down to a secluded beach hidden below the cliffs. Albert marveled at the sight. He had lived near these cliffs for decades and never known about this hidden gem. The crashing waves and the untouched beauty of the shoreline filled him with awe. As they approached the beach, Albert slipped on a sharp rock, cutting his hand deeply. Blood flowed freely. Drawing on his military training, Albert knew exactly what to do. The gash on his hand throbbed, but he remained calm, tearing a strip from his shirt. He dipped the fabric into the salty seawater, wincing as the salt burned his wound, but he knew the sting was a small price to pay to prevent infection. Once cleaned, he wrapped the makeshift bandage tightly around his hand, securing it with a firm knot. The pain was sharp but manageable, and the act of tending to his wound gave him a moment to steady his resolve. The wolf led him along the rocky shoreline and into the mouth of a cave partially hidden by overgrown foliage. Albert paused at the entrance, noting how the opening was partially submerged in seawater. The wolf waded in without hesitation, its dark fur blending into the shadows. Albert followed, his boots splashing into the cold water that soaked his pants up to his knees. The icy chill sent shivers up his spine, but curiosity propelled him forward. The cave swallowed them whole, the light from the entrance fading rapidly. Albert's eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness, and the damp, echoing interior amplified every step he took. He paused, letting his vision adapt, and soon noticed a faint glimmer on the wall, a torch mounted in an iron bracket. Its presence was an anomaly, a clue that others had been here before. He fished his lighter from his pocket, struck a flame, and lit the torch. Warm light flickered, casting long shadows and revealing the cave's man-made features. The walls bore marks of chisels, and the smooth floor hinted at deliberate construction. This was no ordinary cave, it was a tunnel, carved with purpose. After what felt like hours, the tunnel ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door secured with a rusted padlock. The wolf sniffed at the base of the door, then turned to Albert, its gaze imploring. Albert studied the lock, frustration bubbling within him. He had no key, and the door's sturdy construction suggested brute force would be needed to breach it. Spotting a large rock nearby, he hefted it with both hands, ignoring the protest from his weary muscles. With a determined swing, he brought the rock down on the lock. The first strike sent vibrations through his arms, but the lock held. Undeterred, he struck again and again until the metal shattered, the broken pieces clattering to the ground. As Albert examined the room, the wolf approached the middle door, sniffing intently. It pawed at the base and let out a soft whine, its body tense with urgency. Albert moved closer, his hand reaching for the handle, but the door was locked. Frustration flared again as he scanned the room for anything that might serve as a key or tool. Before he could act, a sound echoed through the tunnel behind him, heavy footsteps, and a voice calling out. "Who's there?" The words were sharp, threatening. Albert's heart raced as the footsteps grew louder. The hunter had found them. Acting quickly, Albert extinguished the torch and ducked behind a stack of crates, his breath shallow. The wolf, however, remained in the open, its eyes fixed on the doorway as the hunter entered. The man carried a rifle, his face twisted in a cruel smirk as he spotted the wolf. Well, the hunter drawled, raising his weapon. Albert's mind raced. He couldn't let this man harm the wolf, not after everything they'd been through. Summoning his courage, Albert sprang from his hiding spot with a shout, startling the hunter. The man's finger slipped on the trigger, and the rifle fired, but the bullet missed its mark, striking the padlock on the middle door instead. The metal shattered, and the door creaked open. The wolf seized the opportunity, darting through the doorway. Albert turned to face the hunter, whose shock quickly morphed into anger. Acting on instinct, Albert grabbed a nearby wooden plank and swung it with all his strength. The impact caught the hunter on the side of the head, sending him sprawling to the ground, unconscious. Albert wasted no time. He stepped over the hunter's prone body and followed the wolf through the open door. What he found on the other side took his breath away. The room was smaller, dimly lit by shafts of sunlight streaming through cracks in the rock. In the center, 3 wolf pups huddled together, their small bodies trembling with fear. The mother wolf nuzzled them gently, her eyes softening as she looked at Albert. It all made sense now. The wolf had been leading him to her family, trapped and vulnerable. The hunter had likely captured the pups, intending to sell them or worse. Albert's chest swelled with a mixture of anger and relief as he watched the reunion. The pups, emboldened by their mother's presence, began to explore their surroundings, their playful movements a stark contrast to the tension of moments before. Albert knew they couldn't stay. The hunter might regain consciousness at any moment, and the path to safety lay back through the tunnel. He knelt and gestured to the mother wolf, who seemed to understand. Together, they guided the pups out of the room, retracing their steps through the cavern. Albert carried the torch once more, its flickering light illuminating their path. When they emerged into the fresh air of the forest, Albert felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The wolf and her pups lingered for a moment, their eyes meeting Albert's in silent gratitude. Then, without a sound, they disappeared into the underbrush, their dark forms melding with the shadows of the trees. Albert watched them go, a bittersweet smile on his face. Albert's life returned to its quiet routine, but he often found himself gazing toward the woods, wondering about the wolf and her pups. Though their paths might never cross again, he felt a deep connection to them, a reminder of the adventure that had tested his limits and reaffirmed his belief in the power of trust and courage.